Hey, everybody, it's Reggie Williams, founder and CEO of Ambrosia for Heads. And with me, I have Jake Payne, our editor in chief. And together, this is our What's the Headline. We're laughing and smiling because, we always have like chatter before this. And I think one day we're going to put out a blooper reel because, believe it or not, we have some of our biggest laughs together before this. But it's also a great day for hip hop. We haven't had a Super Friday like this in a minute. We got two albums that are very, very noteworthy, and another one I want to bring some shine to, which might be off people's radar, but I think stands with everything that's been out this year. But with that, how you doing, man?
Man, I'm doing all right. I've had a crazy, crazy week. I feel like I've never run a marathon. It's not on my bucket list, but this week has been a marathon. Shout out to rest in peace to Nipsey Hussle. But yeah, man, I feel good though. This to me, I've looked forward to. Often you and I tape these podcasts either in the late morning, sometimes the afternoon. This one, I've worked for a drink this week, and the music's so good that I went with whiskey. So it's a happy hour podcast, and that feels good.
Is that really whiskey? You should have told me, man. I would have poured myself one.
You need a minute?
Well, yeah, let's put this on pause, everyone. We will be right back. 1 second here.
Perfect.
And we are back. Cheers. This is actually a first for us. There's been one time where I had a drink prior to a podcast, and I think that was Super Bowl. I couldn't, watch the Super Bowl and not have, a drink. That would be, I think, like unpatriotic or whatever it is. So before the Dre one, that turned out okay. Have you had a drink before a podcast?
Yeah, I one of the Versus episodes, I want to say the Dipset or Locks. It might have no, you know what? It was Kxng KRS. I had to have a couple of drinks for that. And that was one of our best episodes. So maybe that's the move. And yeah.
Well, on that note, I can say that both of us have had a few times hungover for sure. And that has definitely led to some of our best work. So we shall see. We shall see. But in any case, like we said, it's a Super Friday for hip hop. There are three albums we're going to talk about today. The first of which has been one that for me has been like Christmas. I've been waiting for Benny the Butcher's Tana Talk for about 6-7 weeks now. We had a false start. We got a lot of reports back in February that it was coming out February 11th. And Benny actually did his press run around then too. He hasn't done another one or not an extensive one this time around. So you think actually this was meant to drop on the 11th of February and got pushed back?
Yeah, I do. And full disclosure, I one of the things that I've done with my career is I help a lot of artists with their press bios. Like I help them get their narrative together. It's something I've done for damn near 20 years. And, I was brought in to help Benny with his, although, similar to what you said, Benny's kept the press run super tight. A lot of times in those cases, you work directly with the artist. And in this particular case, like I didn't hear anything until you did. But I knew even then that they were being very guarded about the release date. But because initially it was like February 11th, you and I even texted each other. I said, I really have my doubts because I thought there would be a little bit of a warm up, and we got something else this week. We only got one single on this album, but there was something that happened this week, which we covered on the site, a Benny freestyle with the LA Leakers. Check it out on Ambrosia for Heads. That always lets you know, boom, something's coming.
Well, you talk about a warm-up, man. What Benny released ahead of this album was more like, a heat-seeking missile. It was his collaboration with J. Cole, Johnny P's Caddy. In fact, it was so good, we devoted the better part of an entire podcast to that song, and then also just the reign that Cole has had on features. But that was an incredible, incredible way to set up the album. Having heard the entire album now, do you think that was the right move? You think that was the right single, or you think he should have led with something different?
100%. And it amazes me because, I will tell you today that I think that is the song of 2022 so far, hands down. Like, no, I know sometimes I'm careful to make those kind of superlatives, that's the joint. And we spent a lot of time, talking about J. Cole, but there have been times where J. Cole has absolutely, buried the people that share the track with. And I think Benny really hung in there with Cole. Incredible record. So glad they got a video. And I think it was the right thing, because that song unto itself, has so much narrative.
Yeah, I think that it should have been a second single, because I think that it sets such huge expectations for the album, not just about the quality, and the quality is obviously there. We're going to talk about that, but also how it sounds sonically. And for me, Johnny P's Caddy is a sonic divergence from the rest of the album. So I think that by, putting out another song first, you start to get people's like heads around where it's going sonically. You put this out to diversify it and bring in a different crowd. And then boom, you drop the album.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, hands down, J. Cole is the one guest that's not like the others, just in terms of subject matter, background, even his delivery style. I kind of like it. I mean, just go with the wild card early and let the growth and range be demonstrated with Benny. And then obviously, things like production choices and whatnot.
So I think that Johnny P's Caddy should have been on his Def Jam album, but we'll get into it. So first of all, Tana Talk 4, one of the things I've been curious about with Benny and other artists is why they decide to categorize an album as part of a series. Like, what is it about this series that, the characteristics this album captures? So Benny has the Plugs I Met series, Tana Talk series. Any other ones you can think of?
No, I mean, those are the two. Yeah, I mean, he's done some collabo stuff. Those are the front runners by far.
So in his press release, Benny talked about Tana Talk and what that series means. He said, I love Tana Talk 3. It's what got me familiar with the people. It's the real me, who I was then. It's my baby, my firstborn. It brought me here and made me. With Tana Talk 4, I have a chip on my shoulder. No one thinks I can recreate that energy. I'm not trying to create the same energy, but Tana Talk 3 was who I was then, what I was going through. The things you hear me talking about on Tana Talk 4 is me now and who I've become. It's special to me because I get to talk about things that I would never talk about on any other project. Tana Talk is a series where you get me in my deepest, darkest feelings. I'm sure people are going to be surprised at the things I'm saying on Tana Talk 4, but they're also going to get an inside look at things. So without even getting into songs, do you think the album as a whole delivers on that statement?
I do. I 100% do.
Yeah, I agree. It's snippets. You got some artists who, like with a Book of Rhyme, where Royce poured out his heart on every single song, like throughout, and Cole with a lot of his work. Benny sprinkles. He brings his brags and boasts, but he'll also talk about the work he's put in, the hustle and the grind that he's achieved, the mixed feelings that come with that. And he'll sprinkle that in line by line here and there. It's not like a whole song. Although, interestingly, Plugs I Met has done that. The first one, I forget the name of the last song, but it's super, super dope, where he just lays out the entire like autobiography of, I think, say again?
Was it 5 to 50?
Yeah. Like, he lays out his entire autobiography of like, I think what sent him to prison, right? Was that and so there's not a song like that on here, but there's plenty of game that Benny drops in it.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting series too, because on the surface, this is volume 4. But what's really interesting, and I had to do some of this research in, coming up with the materials, no one can find the first Tana Talk. It goes back to the era of hand-to-hand, mix CDs, and there's a Reddit thread about it. And the second one, I don't know what exact year it came out. It predates Benny's affiliation with Griselda. It was back when he still, was rocking with the acronym, BENNY. The Butcher kind of wasn't, his moniker. And based on the outfits, I mean, Benny's wearing, an oversized tee, and he's kind of got that look. It has that, 2000 late, like 2010s, early teens flavor to it. But really, Tana Talk 3 was the game changer for Benny. And I'm so proud, that Ambrosia for Heads, a lot of our writers, were big Benny fans that predate even you and I being fans. And back in 2018, we premiered Joe Pesci 38, which is an Alchemist produced joint, had the video. That's what we did. We premiered the video. And while there were other publications out there that were, supporting Benny, a lot of them, I would think would fall under the blog category. In our space, we were out there, and that became a huge inflection point, as you and I know. I mean, you and I have debated over the last, 3.5 years over the year end of 2018. We've both agreed that Benny should have been in our best albums list. Westside Gunn was with Supreme Blientele, but Benny deserved to be there too. And to now watch all of his, kind of roosters come to hatch is dope.
Yeah, that's right. That's the reason why I don't like arbitrary numbers for lists. On the one hand, they keep you honest, and you can't have just like 500 albums on your year-end list. But on the other hand, sometimes you can't neatly fit it into 10 or 12 or 15 or whatever it is. And this is one of those instances. And Supreme Blientele, actually, when I look back, I don't know, I might put Tana Talk 3 in now instead of that, but it had great guests. Sonically, it was amazing.
Incredible production.
Let's say again.
Incredible production.
Incredible production. At the time, it was one of Gunn's best works, although I think he surpassed that since then. And Tana Talk 3, was great, but it was just the beginning of like, I think the run that Benny has been on for the last 3 years. So we're just starting to get acclimated with them. Had you heard Tana Talk 2?
No. And I always wonder, in those years, I would have either been at All Hip Hop or Hip Hop DX. And there was a lot of things that have come through. And over the years, I've watched, always laugh, Danger, who was Timberland's like #2 producer for a while, used to just pitch me stuff like in the mid 2000s. And then he goes on to have all these hit records with Justin Timberlake and Nelly Furtado and, all the people that Tim works with. So you never know who's reaching out. And every so often, I'll look in my archives to see if somebody was hitting me. And there's a chance, Benny and Gunn, Conway, all of those guys. But I really like how they serialize rap, and I think it's a translation of the street, obviously like the Purple tape, that has to do with, the color of the cassette, but that's yellow tops, red tops. And if for anyone that's watching, the Wu-Tang Clan, series on Hulu, which we dedicated a whole episode to, there was a nice distinction of taking that world and making it to music. And I kind of feel like Griselda has done the same thing, which is not new, but, we've seen the Carters, we've seen the Blueprints, we've seen the Illmatic, Stillmatic, and it's amazing that here we are talking about Tana Talk. And I would venture to bet that a lot of the people that are listening to this album have never heard Tana Talk 2, let alone, the grail out there of the first volume.
Word. And it's interesting that even in his quote, Benny refers to Tana Talk 3 as, as his baby, his firstborn. So even he seems to think like that's the one that really kind of kicked off the series officially.
And for anyone who's new to the party, I know I say Tana, I have a Pittsburgh accent, but it is Tana, and it's an abbreviation for Montana, which is the street, where in Buffalo, a lot of the ish went down, and Benny was very much part of that, as was his brother. So it is him taking you back to the genesis of who he is. So it aligns so well with that quote you shared.
Yeah. All right. So let's get into it. The album starts off with Johnny P's Caddy, the song featuring J. Cole. We talked about this. We encourage you to go back and listen to that podcast. We're not going to go too deep into it. But one of the things that I think struck us both was that neither one of us thought that this was going to be the first song. Well, no, why were you surprised by that?
I don't know. You just don't always, first of all, I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't that the Quincy Jones formula of like push the best 2 songs to the top of an album?
I don't think so, man. When I think about Thriller, that formula doesn't fit. You had Beat It, and on the second side, and Thriller was the last song on the first side. Yeah,
that's a heavy
on the second side, huh?
That's a heavy example, though, Thriller. But obviously, you're going to mention Quincy Jones. You're going to go there first, so I feel you. But no, I didn't. First of all, I personally find you never expect a song unless it's a concept to be that first joint or an introductory album, let alone to start a personal album like that with a huge collaboration. Very, very interesting choice.
Yeah, I think that it should have been either the culminate. I think it should have been the culmination of this album or on a Def Jam like album. And the culmination would have been cool because it would have been a signal for what's to come. It would have been, I think, a real strategic move. For me, it's such a big record that I think that you use the rest of the album to build to it. And then that's the thing that really kind of like makes it pop at the very end. And it's his coronation, because so much of Tana Talk 4, as we'll get into, is about the things that Benny has overcome and, the scenes that he's faced throughout his life. And Johnny P's Caddy is almost like his victory lap. It's where he really celebrates himself and his crew and states to the world that who he is. And that's a GOAT MC.
I'm gonna pull a Reggie on you though. Like, I'm gonna play devil's advocate, because here's the thing, and you're not gonna know this simply from pressing play, but one of the things that we know, especially from that episode and the press surrounding it, Johnny P's Caddy is in its title a reference to riding around with Benny's father in his Cadillac Seville in the 90s. Usually Westside Gunn was there, and they were listening to, your Mobb Deeps, your Biggies, your Jays, your Nas's. So conceptually, it's Benny going back to his love affair with rap and hip hop. It just so happens it's not one of those super tangible, outside of the title, like you're not getting that story in the lyrics, but what you are getting is an MC rapping at a top level with a super surprise guest that you expect on a major label album, not an independent one. So yeah, I see you, but I'm just shooting some discerning thoughts there.
I hear you. Maybe the title says that, but lyrically, everything in that song is about he's arrived. Gotcha. And the reason why Cole is on there is because he's supposed to be rapping with J. Cole. He's supposed to be in that conversation with Cole and Kendrick and Drake. He is the guy who says he's a GOAT MC. Griselda has established themselves, and he says, "What didn't we?" This is his coronation. This is his self-coronation, I think. But so that being the case, neither one of us thought it was going to be the first song. Why do you think they made it the first song?
I don't know. It just feels like one of those artistic moves. I like the example I just said to you right now. I mean, do you have any thoughts beyond that?
I think the streaming era has a lot to do with it. I think, I think, as we know, album sales now aren't about complete plays of an entire album. It's about the number of times a song or songs have been played on that album. And if you've got the biggest single up front, people are going to hit play on that a lot. And so you're going to get more. And so, I think that could be part of it. Or maybe Benny just wanted to start off strong. It's interesting, but I do wonder what it would have been if it was released in the CD era, if it would have been mixed in the same way.
That's a really good point. Yeah. And here's what I will say. I mean, dedicated a whole episode primarily to that song. I think what we said then holds up. This really is the best, song of any genre that I've heard in 2022. It's incredible, top tier rap collaboration. There's been some really good ones that we talked about, Nas and Lauren, Andre 3000 and Kanye on the deluxe edition. I'll say Kendrick and Baby Keem last year. I mean, what Kendrick did, but to watch these two guys rapping in this type of way is huge. And then I honestly believe this is one of Alchemist's best beats in years. And I think Alchemist is at the top of his game. I mean, look at his, just how much he's producing right now, how many different people he's working with. This one is like a keep it thorough. Like, this one really is one of those benchmark beats in his catalog. I just think it's three great artists, at the top. I stand by the song.
Yeah, man, I agree with you. I also think this is one of Al's best beats, and he is absolutely one of my favorite producers. And his style is so diverse. So I made this playlist called Chemistry, just about Al and the Chemist. And Some of his beats are, The Realist, Keep It Thorough from Mobb Deep and Prodigy, We Gonna Make It, Jadakiss, Worst Come to Worst, Dilated Peoples, Red Carpet Treatment. Songs like Break the Bank by Schoolboy Q, Terry, Action Bronson, Know You're Wrong, Schoolboy Q, Fear by Kendrick, Throw It All Away, Evidence. He's got 3 joints off Tana Talk 3, actually, too, 97 Hold being one of them. His styles are just so varied, but this one is different. This one is, dare I say, a bit more commercial, a bit more polished, a bit more easy on the ears. And that's not there's no shade to that. I love his complex, but he typically has complex dissonant sounds, very dark sounds. This is bright. This is like soulful and easy on the ears. So, it's a different sound for Alchemist.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, and the We Gonna Make It has its own, storied history to it. And one of the songs, I mean, Al made Wet Wipes for Cameron. Like, Al has this ability. I feel like if you go to him and you're like, hey, this is the one that I'm gonna try to do XYZ with, he's capable of that. I mean, DJ Premier has always been that too, of, Christina Aguilera could go, and call him up and be like, hey, I want this, and they could do it. But you're right. I feel like this is Al, like this song has so many legs to it where it was designed to be more than just a joint for the heads.
Word. All right, so next up we got Back 2 Times. This is a song produced by Derringer and Beat Butcha. The Griselda stable of producers is such a huge advantage. And like Derringer has got to be one of the most prolific producers in the game of all time, actually. You think about people like Manning Fresh and Beats by the Pound and what they did. You think about the Hitmen. But, in terms of how much output Griselda has, and we're talking Conway, Westside Gunn, Benny, Boldy James at times, Mahami, lots and lots of MCs. Derringer is in the mix on all those, producing, and Beat Butcha as well. And there's no dip in quality. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, as I understand it, and we ran a documentary in 2019, when Griselda released the What Would Kxng Gun Do album with Shady, it was around that time, from my understanding, that Beat Butcha was brought into the fold. And, shout out Derringer, like Alchemist, Beat Butcha's been a supporter of AFH. And, he's from the UK. And what I understand that they did is brought him in to help override samples. Beat Butcha's able to get these sounds that Derringer or, some of the other people they work with at times don't have to sample. It's sort of like, what Prime did with Adrian Young, where they can create sounds, sample out of it, boom. And the chemistry, because, Derringer was at the helm for all that pre-fame when you didn't need to clear a sample and or might not have to. And that's carried over really well, and the chemistry is great. So yeah, the fact that you can seamlessly go from an Alchemist joint to a Derringer Beat Butcha joint is there, and that's true of Tana Talk 3 too. But anyway, continue.
That's amazing. So I didn't know that, and just so folks know who might not, Adrian Young is a super talented musician, pianist, and plays lots of instruments, and often is associated with jazz. But Prime, DJ Premier and Royce had him make original music that they then sampled, and Premier put his touch on it and made it sound like jazz records that he was sampling. And so it sounds like Beat Butcha does something similar, because if you listen to Back 2 Times, it sounds very much like a dusty jazz loop that is chopped. But if it's original, that's amazing. It's really, really smart from a business standpoint, and sonically amazing too. So this song features Stove God Cooks. Stove God is another guy who has grown on me over the last year or so. He had his mixtape out last year. What was it?
You had a joint out in 2020 called Reasonable Drought. And a lot of folks, again, to these lists, when we did our 2020 list, a lot of folks called us out for not including, that joint. But continue.
Yeah, I listened to it, and I couldn't catch it. I didn't catch it at the time. But since then, I've heard him a ton on Westside Gunn projects, Hermes 8, He was on 5 songs on part 1 and 2 songs on side B. And I've heard him on a lot of Griselda joints over the last year or so. And I love his voice. I love his approach. You have a comparison to a prolific MC who's been very seminal over the years. Like, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, to tell me who I'm referring to. You know something I don't.
You said Rock Marciano.
Oh yeah, well, so interestingly enough, Rock is part of this because Rock produced that Reasonable Drought album. And, a lot of people said that Rock, crawled so Griselda and some other artists could run, could walk. And shout out to Elliot Wilson and the Rap Radar podcast. They really made that point home in an interview with Rock where he talked about that. And it's been great that as Griselda's getting to some new rooms, they brought Rock with them. And Rock producing that album, because Rock is a double threat, MC producer. It's great to kind of see that Rock Marcy stamp, forge ahead. And you're absolutely right. In 2021, there were 2 Griselda signings, Stove God and Rome Streets. And both of those artists, sort of like Mock, they might drop a project on Griselda, they might not, but it's kind of that stamp of officialness. And to me, Stove God was on 2 Chainz album this year, which people might not realize, on the joint called Vlad TV. I mean, what kind of look is that? You talk about a Def Jam album. Here's an artist that has, a very polarizing style, very like distinct. It kind of reminds me of Westside Gunn that way. But in a lot of ways, I think this appearance on Back 2 Times is going to really kick open some new doors for him.
Yeah, absolutely. And Benny is talking his talk on this song. This is a theme that happens throughout the album. He says, don't compare me to rappers who aren't in the top 10. And then he talks about having dropped 2 #1 albums in less than a year. You think he's talking about rap charts there? Like, I'm trying to think of what the charts are for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think he might mean even just lists. I don't think Griselda gets too caught up in charts, but yeah, that is one of the themes of this album, because I think TT4 is going to, it's letting to one of the cliches of the pandemic, the new price is not the old price. And I think Benny is using this entire album as a theme to let you know, I'm not just in the new class, I'm in the class.
Yesterday's price is not today's price.
Boom, boom.
One of the most interesting things to me that he says, though, is my style mixed with Boldy James now and Tupac then. That's a really, really interesting statement. And I'm trying to figure out what he meant by that. What do you think he means?
That's a tricky one. I mean, Tupac wasn't the only one, but what I like about Pac is, especially, as his career took flight, he rapped about real things in real places. Like, you can get an entire think piece on one Tupac song, on the names he mentions, the places he mentions. It's actual factual, or at least there's substantial speculation of things. And I feel like Benny does that. I feel like he's giving you his life. And while rap is always going to be part of it, the streets are parallel. And he points to figures, names, times, places that are real. That's what makes this pulp nonfiction. So that's the correlation I get. The Boldy part, again, I said it about Rock, but Boldy's been doing this for 10 years, plus. And I feel like with this movement, with Griselda stepping ahead, Boldy is another artist that's getting the recognition that I don't think he got in 2008. I don't think he got when Nas first signed him to Mass Appeal. Like, Boldy is leveling up and Griselda's bringing their influences with them. Do you see it any differently?
Yeah, I think that Boldy is super lyrical, but in a subtle way. I think it's very easy to sleep on just how lyrical the dude is. And I think that Makami is similar to that. So I think that he's talking about how deceptively lyrical he is, like a Boldy. And then also, to your point, the kind of pain and raw realness he can bring, like Pac did too. So that's a pretty dangerous combination. So yeah, Benny's definitely talking his stuff though on this one. So next up, you wanna take this one?
Yeah, super plug. And this, to me, when I think of the great MCs, Pac did this, Jay has done it. I think of Nas, where he says, I never brag how real I keep it, because that's the best secret. Benny Begins, you know, I keep it real in everything I do, on everything I say. Like, just those moments to let you know that I'm a standalone MC, I think is really powerful. And again, this is one of those affirmations. You know, one of the things that Benny had told people, like the Breakfast Club, in that limited press run back in January, early February, is that this doesn't deviate from the TT formula. And this type of joint, I mean, absolutely. This is Alchemist treating this album like it's 2018 again. And I really enjoy it. You know, I think it's one of those just hard-nosed, I'm back in the trap type records.
Yeah, this is one of those dark and haunting Alchemist beats. I think that if you were to play this record and Johnny P's Caddy for people, not many people would assume that it was the same producer, which is like the gift of Alchemist. A lot of people, you know, have a very distinct sonic identity. Pharrell, the Neptunes, Puff, like you can just kind of hear Dre, you can hear Primo's drums, his scratches. Alchemist is very tough to pin down. You know, he's got lanes that he plays in, but they all sound very different. And this is one of those like haunting beats, you know, along the lines, very sparse, like Break the Bank for Schoolboy Q, just dark. And I think Benny rides it and uses it in a way that is really, I think it's really aligned with what the beat is trying to convey. You know, he goes back to his early days of hustling. He talks, and this is what I love about, like, the realest rappers don't just talk about, like, they don't glorify their past. They you know, obviously they're making money and doing things to get themselves up a level or two, but they also talk about the pain and the fear and the consequences. And in this one, he says, all this paper on the line got my nerves all jumpy. You know, so he's acknowledging that, yo, like, you know, with this money comes like real, like, potential danger. And then he also talks about having driven 6 hours to make a pickup, and his daughter was in the car. And so, like, imagine that, you know, you're riding dirty and you got your daughter in the car. And what happens if you're pulled over, or
Even just the morality,
sees you, recognize you, the whole nine. Yeah. So that was ill for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's one of the qualities that, you know, Jay and Pusha T and a few others can do, where they can talk about something that, you know, a lot of people cannot relate to, and you can still find, you know, if you're just looking at stressful situations or moral compromises, and you can relate to it. And I love Benny for keeping it that real. So he goes from comparing himself to Boldy on a song to the next song featuring Boldy James. I'll pass it over to you.
We're Weekends in the Perrys. Any idea what that means, by the way?
I don't. And one thing though, like, I love, Easter egg might be too strong of a word, but Griselda has always said their song titles are deliberate. Like, Dr. Bird's was a real place. Like, the names of their songs are these stark reminders of where they come from. So, you know, if Benny does a press run, and I would love, as would you, to have him back, you know, talking to AFH, because we've spoken to him a few times. I would love to find that out.
Word. Yeah. You know, actually, you can find a couple of interviews we've done. We did one Benny solo for the Plugs I'm At, and then we did another one with Westside Gunn, Conway, and Benny. Think you would enjoy those, but they're on our channel. But this one, you know, is Alchemist again, another soulful beat, very, very soulful. It's one of my favorite tracks on the entire album. It features Boldy James, who Benny had just name checked in that last song, and who has been a very close Griselda affiliate over the last couple of years or so. I think some of his best albums have come out with Griselda. And, you know, he says, when you're talking most authentic, then, you know, who gonna fit in my shoes? You know, he's making an argument, you know, about why he's leveling up. And one of the most provocative lines that he says is that he's West's best investment. So he means Westside Gunn's best investment. He says, but that's between me and you, obviously, of course, on a record that's very public. But do you think that he is Westside Gunn's best investment?
Hands down. And you know, things I've learned in the last year is, you know, Wes and Conway, you know, brothers, really kind of started the Griselda movement. And Benny, you know, he mentions on this album at one point that Black Soprano family is like a decade deep. You know, he had his own situation But at one point, they decided that it was best for Benny and best for Griselda to work together. And I think what Benny's done, I don't know that the movement is as exciting without, kind of a, not to use another rap cliche, but it's a three-headed monster. And then they've allowed all these other kind of things to happen on the side all day long. I love that lyric.
It's fascinating, man. I saw Griselda, and I think I'm getting the years right. I believe it was 2017. I saw them at A3C, and it was in a bar, and there's maybe 30 or 40 people in there. You had plenty of room to move around in the bar. A year later, I saw them on the main stage, and it was rainy and during the day, and no one, the headlines are for like, at nighttime, 7+ during the day, and it was packed. Like it was more as packed as it was for Wu-Tang. That's how much their movement built within a year. Now, I think that was post the Shady signing. The Shady signing happened in between that, but still, like just to see their grind build over that time was incredible. So in terms of West's best investment, I will say monetarily, absolutely. We've seen what Benny has done, the luster he's brought to the label and to himself, a couple of major label deals. I'm not gonna opine, and this is a theme that comes up in a later song that we'll discuss, on who is the better MC between him and Conway or Makami or Rome Streets or Stove God, because I don't even think it's about that. Yeah. I think it's about financial return and return on investment, and Benny's paying dividends.
Yeah, and yeah, let's be clear, but I think the advances that Griselda has made are not possible with just one or two artists. To have three bubbling at the same time together and apart, in working towards the same thing is massive. Right. Yeah, and I like this song. One thing I will say, speaking objectively, this isn't the Boldy feature I wanted. I think Stove God uses a lot with what he's got on there. Obviously, J. Cole, continues his streak. And not for nothing, Boldy was on my most listened to song of last year. All of that said, by evidence with Boldy, I'm a huge fan. This collaboration was one of the places that I thought didn't excite me in the most way.
I got to listen to it more. And just so folks know, Jake and I really tried not to do hot takes on music. We both believe that you have to listen to music, and often over time, in order to really process it and catch what the artist is trying to convey. In this instance, we were fortunate enough to have an advanced copy, and so we've been listening to this album for like the last 5 or 6 days. So this is not like a 24-hour hot take. But I will say that I haven't spent enough time listening to what Boldy is trying to convey lyrically, in terms of his flow. Which I think is impeccable and, just dark and menacing and like very, very distinct. I think his flow is dope. And so to me, it's like a great Boldy feature, but I got to listen to what he's talking about to just know whether it transcends other ones.
Yeah. And one thing I'll say, I've listened to this album a number of times. I haven't had the chance yet in the car. You asked me at the top about this week. I was in an accident this week. I haven't been driving much. I always, it's the Dr. Dre formula. Even though I've usually lived in East Coast cities, I always love music in the car, especially when you're alone with it. And this is an album that I'm really eager to ride out alone with.
Yeah, it just hits different. Hits different in the car. So the next one is mad controversial. When I first heard this, I was super excited. I knew it would make for a great story. And, I thought it was a great fit for him. But the second one is called 10 More Commandments. And it's a build on, this next one is 10 More Commandments. And it's a build on Biggie's 10 Crack Commandments. So rather than do another 1 through 10, Benny does 20 to 11. So, Biggie does his 1 through 10 and Benny builds up to 20. So off rip, this is such a bold move to revisit such a revered and classic record like that. So do you think that Benny had the right to do this?
I do. I think it's I mean, he makes Biggie very much a part of the song. It's super referential. I know Biggie is one of the GOATs, and I think that Benny is one of the GOATs of our time right now. The rest will be, is written in the stars. It'll be proven. I mean, he's 3 or 4 years into a career, takes this liberty, does so with the blessing of Diddy, who's on the song, Puffy, and DJ Premier, who's not part of the song, but produced and was a big part of the original. There's a lot of fuck shit that goes on in hip hop. There's a lot of unauthorized use and people jumping over J Dilla beats and really bastardizing legacies. To me, this is not that. And let's not forget that Benny has taken liberties before, even down to the Jay-Z homage on TT3 that you referenced a moment ago. I think it's fine. Do you feel differently?
I'm not a biter, I'm a writer. I'm big enough, my brother, I'm big enough to do it. Yeah, man. I think that a lot of times people just want to hate. And I'll say that getting the cosign from Puff was big, one. But to your point, he name checks Big in almost every single one of these commandments. And so for me, I think about the original genesis of the song. And it was done by a guy who had been in the streets and actually knew the rules and was like reciting them to other folks. And Benny clearly has that pedigree. He's done his things. He, is very well documented what he's done. So I think about people like him, maybe Pusha T. Like, I wonder who else could make a song like this.
I would say E40 is one of the people that doesn't get credit in this conversation that absolutely could, but there's a select few. And, I don't specifically seek out quote unquote D-boy rap, but you want to know like where you can get that narrative from. And, shout out, even to Ice-T just on the hustling tip, back in the day. Benny's definitely in that conversation right now. And you're absolutely right. Pusha T, who's still razor sharp, doing it too. And I'm kind of surprised Push didn't do this first, but the fact that Benny didn't just ask for forgiveness, it seems to me that he asked for permission because, Notorious B.I.G., Christopher Wallace is a sacred person within hip hop, a fallen legend. I'm with it, man. Now, you want to compare the records side by side, that's a whole other story.
Yeah, I mean, it's no comparison. I'm very glad that he didn't use the same beat, because I think that would have, maybe crossed a line. But, and that Primo beat is it's one of my favorite Primo beats with the Chuck D sample. And, it was originally a promo for Hot 97 that Primo repurposed and scratched up.
Damager, yeah.
Jerry the Damager, and killed it. So, with that in mind, so Benny's 10 commandments are, number 20, you got to make sure you count all the money, before closing the deal. 19 is don't ever burn a plug. Self-explanatory. 18 is you better test that work before you buy it. Also, you get that. 17 is take care of the people around you. I thought that was interesting. A lot of people think it's about self and want to succeed on their own. But if you don't take care of the people around you, then all of a sudden you got enemies in your circle. 16 is, he says you got to stack. You should spend that money on re-upping and not at sex. So no matter what business you're in, like that's about being frugal and reinvesting in your business. You and I know a lot about that. Number 15, he said, F all that spending on clothes. Only buy stuff that can be sold. That was heavy to me. What did you think about that one?
I like that. I love the fact that it comes after 16 of like, yo, don't be buying, Versace, this or that. But if you buy something, buy it of tangible value. And I just think that's game. That is a really, like, again, you're going to touch a record like this, you better have some original thought. And that, to me, I didn't see that coming. And I really thought it was great juxtaposition after the commandment before.
That is game. And I'll never forget, man. It was, I think, my first year in law school, talking to one of my classmates. This dude was like meant to be a mogul. He was born to be a mogul. He came to law school to be a billionaire. And he told me, he said, don't buy depreciating goods, only buy appreciating goods. I was like, wow, okay. And, look that up, but, just only buy things that are going to increase in value is the basic notion. And, Benny's not going that far, but he's saying don't buy stuff that you just literally are just going to lose all your money on, and clothes are definitely that. So 14 is just lead by example, very simple, but straight to the point. Number 13, you want to take that one?
Yeah, man, no social media posting. And again, this is one of the places that he even explains leading up to that it's something big would not have seen coming. And I dig that, because I think we all know, anyone listening to this, that one person that lets you know everything they're eating, every purchase they make, they're trying to high post. And yeah, I mean, especially if you're swimming in these waters, you can't be doing that. Rule number 12, stand for something or fall for anything. Respect is like a shell. And I think the word is shell. I want to be sure of that. Is that what you heard too?
I'm not sure, but I mean, the first part is the most important, which is, stand for something or fall for anything. And, we've all heard that, and it's true.
Got to have scruples. And then the last one on the countdown, 11 is the most important. The first chance you get, you better get out this ish. And he talks, I mean, leading up to that, of every move you make, you're dancing with a sentence. And again, this is coming from Benny. This is coming from somebody, who's in his mid to upper 30s, whose career, arguably, given the talent that he has, could have taken flight at an earlier time. But he's lived out the consequences of this very thing that he's talking about. And I think that comes from a super real place. And I feel like if Big, who would now be, in his 50s, right? If he were to hear a song like 10 Crack Commandments, you want a wise ending. And Benny gives you just that. And I think that was very poised of him.
Yeah, man, I love that. It goes back to exactly what we were talking about earlier about not glorifying it. Benny's one of those guys who talks about the consequences. It's not just money and clothes. It's, you're really risking things that are significant. So I love that.
Yeah, that's a super important narrative. And again, Diddy's on the song. I don't like calling him Diddy. Puffy's on the song.
Love, yeah.
Yeah. I honestly didn't think he added a lot to it. There's places, I mean, this is the ad-lib king, and for as many records as I feel like Puff has taken, from a 9 to a 10 simply by, take that. I like his outro because it echoes Benny's last point. Puff uses it as a moment to kind of remind you. And you and I did an article on AFH years ago about just where, his head is at right now. Shout out to him. But some of the places where he talks during the record, I really wish they would have let just Benny had the moment. But it is a cool reminder, and maybe a record as sacred as 10 Crack Commandments needs that reminder of like, yo, this is endorsed, this is sanctioned, this is authentic.
Yeah, this was one of the more disappointing outros from Puff that I've heard. You think about what he did on J. Cole's Let Go My Hand and how deep that was, given the significance of the record. And for me, you talk about taking a record from one number to another. I think he took Rick Ross's Nobody to like a 12 with his ad-libs on that. His game is so crazy. I've sent that to you as Song of the Day on a number of occasions just for you to listen to the ad-libs on that. It's some of the most motivational stuff I've ever heard. So I wonder if that was commentary, if that was, purposeful, or just like it was just what it was.
Interesting. And I'm really glad you mentioned that Ross record, because again, for anyone out there, and I don't know that there's people out there that give Ross a pass that you're not going to give Benny, but Biggie records have been maybe not sequeled in this way quite literally, but there have been those homages before, and yeah, they've been sanctioned. I know Ross has accomplished so much, but just on that lyrical, like from a very short transition level, I really like the connection here.
Yeah. All right. So next up is Tyson versus Ali, and this features Conway the Machine. This is another one of my favorite records on the album, produced by Derringer, very soulful. And you want to break it down?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really incredible concept. And whereas, I mean, even down to something like Crack Commandments, you might see that coming. This one, I didn't see coming. And it's interesting because there have been a lot of lyrics, both from Conway and from Benny, about the comparisons. Like Westside Gunn makes no, he's not out to convince you that he is a spiritual lyrical miracle. Gunn is a vibe. And while he might say profound things, Benny and Conway are the MCs. And I feel like because they come from the same crew, a lot of people have been saying this or that, like, which one's yours? And this song really contextualizes that. And I think it's interesting because I imagine these guys to be a very close age. And where, I personally, tell me if you're different. I heard about Conway before I heard about Benny. Was that the same for you?
Yeah, for sure.
Not in a wide window there, but I think it's interesting that they choose Ali versus Tyson. Two fighters, top of their class, top of their era. Right as Ali was winding down, boom, you have 3 or 4 years and Mike goes pro, does all that. But, we speculate what would have happened if, and they kind of let they're a unified front and they stand that way. And instead, it's very generous on Benny's part because he really distinguishes Conway as kind of his OG. And let's not forget too, these are relatives, these are cousins that grew up together, rode around together. And it's just a really, as we talk about concepts, and we're going to be talking a lot about them on the second half of the podcast, interesting song that I really like and want to come back to.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because, there's a YouTube series hosted by Beat, formerly of Rap Radar, who for Complex called Brackets. And it's, a list of, 16 of who's the greatest or what's the greatest verse, what's the greatest song, what's the greatest D-boy song, and so there's one, and he has different guests on each time to like kind of debate these brackets with him. So it's always an MC. There's one where he had Benny on it, and it was, who's the hottest MC, I think it was. And Benny was, he had to exclude himself. And there were 16 names that Benny had to decide upon. And ultimately he went with the home team and declared Conway the hottest MC in the game. So, the message is that this Griselda team is indivisible. You're not going to ever catch one of those dudes naming someone else over their crew, and I think for each one of them, they're the best. But if it's going to be someone else, it's always going to be one of their brothers in the crew. And this song, I think, speaks to that. Some of the lines that Benny has are so confusing. Y'all compare two dudes from the same movement only for y'all amusement. It's funny for me. Y'all do it. Truth is, while I'm killing this ish, Conway be somewhere rooting. So listen, yes, I have great success and I think I'm the nicest, but you know what? My guy is out there like being my number one champion. And so all this division y'all trying to sell is just in your heads. It's not part of what we do. And Conway in his last line, he says, tell B Dot I said F his list machine. So even though he was named number one, by Benny, he's like, yo, you shouldn't even be like sowing this trying to sow this dissension between us anyway. So I thought that was interesting. And the other thing I think is that, the reason why they chose Ali versus Tyson instead of like Tyson versus Holyfield or Ali versus Foreman or Frazier is because it's apples and oranges. It's two different fruits, but it's no comparison, right? Like they both got their own style. They both got their own lane, and it is what it is. And they're both the greatest in their own unique lane, and that's what it is.
Jordan versus LeBron. Yeah, I like it. And honestly, this song made me think of other examples in hip hop where people of the same crew are compared and kind of deciphered this way. And the best example to me is Ray and Ghost. Like to this day, you'll have conversations with hip hop heads and they'll be like, oh, you like Wu-Tang? Okay, Ray or Ghost. Like, what's your number one? And I don't think that Ray and Ghost have ever made that type of song. And I think it's a really interesting statement record.
Yeah, absolutely. The comparisons in lots of crews like Black Hippie, obviously, with Kendrick and Q and J Rock and F Soul. NWA had it. De La Soul had it with Dave and Paz.
Outkast. Yeah.
Outkast, definitely. Run DMC, Jaleel and Ecstasy from Houdini, Havoc and Prodigy. Like it goes on and on, man. There's always going to be that comparison. But reality is, I think that most of those MCs all believe themselves 100% to be the best in the world, and that's what it is. But if there's going to be anybody who's going to test them, it's going to be their brother.
Yeah, and I mean, Benny has that type of understanding of generosity. You and I really unpacked that with the J. Cole record, given that Jermaine's saying some wild stuff on there, which very well may be true, and you accept it, The next joint is Uncle Bun. This is another one that I was curious about the title. And immediately I thought Bun B, just being, again, one of the hip hop OGs. Bun B is somebody that very much fits into that, kind of that D-boy to successful B-boy kind of transition we're talking about. But this one, produced by Derringer, it features 38 Spesh. And, we talked about the folks that Griselda's tapped and brought into the fold, like Boldy and Stove God Cooks. I really enjoy this record. 2018 was a banner year for Benny. TT3 is a huge part of that. Earlier in the year, he had released Stabbed and Shot with 38 Spesh. And 38 Spesh, shout out to him, part of the upstate, he's from Rochester. I actually told you in the Slaughterhouse episode, I was telling somebody, I believe I sat next to 38 Spesh for a concert back in the day for the Shady Showcase. And, he's doing his own thing on his own terms. But it's a great reminder of like those folks that you grind with in the trenches artistically, give them their moment too. And, Benny's done that before on Plugs I Met with Spesh. I like this. There's just a lot of history there. It's not a conceptual song that needs deep unpacking, but it's just one of those moments that fills out an album that represents the, bags to riches kind of growth that you're getting with Benny.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's cool that they shorten their verses. It's not just 1:16 and another 16. They each kind of like go back and forth, which is dope. So yeah, it was a cool track. So next up is Thowy's Revenge, another one, like it got to be a specific reference there. Produced by Alchemist. The thing that was noteworthy to me about this song is this is the fastest I've ever heard Benny rap. Benny's a very methodical, slower paced rapper. You can hear every word. You get the references. I think Johnny P's Caddy, one thing I didn't mention is that I think it was one of the more complex rhyme schemes that he had. Every single rhyme was at least 3 syllables, rhyming with 3 more syllables, which was incredible. And he stayed with Cole. And like my opinion, the greatest MCs. So like a super average MC will rap 1 syllable. A decent MC will rap 2. Great MCs will rap 3. I've heard Eminem on Lose Yourself. If you look at the lyrics on Lose Yourself, Eminem he rhymes entire sentences throughout.
Rest in peace, MF Doom.
Yeah, word. Doom too. Like they're I'm not saying he's the sole one, but like there's a certain class of elite MC who's like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 syllables at a time, which is just mind-blowing. But Benny is definitely showcasing his versatility here. And part of that includes his speed. And on this song, he's rapping as fast as I've ever heard and that I can recall. And it sounds like it's almost like a triplets flow. But what did you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that you said. I like, we talked about these lyrics that are referential to Griselda. He says that Wes, showed him the formula, and you don't know if that applies to music or otherwise. And then there's this affirmation. And throughout this album, Benny references deals. He references things that he passed on, but he said, I'm going to make my own self a millionaire. And I would venture to bet, Benny's a millionaire right now, but to have that kind of self-confidence and wherewithal to will it to fruition, again, it's just that kind of inspirational record, aspirational too.
Yeah, that line, but I'm gonna make my own self a millionaire, was in direct reference to Wes showing the formula. So I think what he's talking about there is, as a businessman, Westside Gunn, and you and I have talked about this quite often, I think is one of the most brilliant business minds in hip hop. if you look at the rise of Griselda, especially with the type of music that they have and the limitations on airplay and marketability by traditional means and things like that, for them to have achieved the success that they have right now is only the product of a mastermind. And they built out so much, I can see fashion coming, and he's associated himself with that. He's seen at high fashion at Paris runway events and things like that. He was with Virgil Abloh in Paris, I believe, like a year or so ago. Virgil did his artwork. Yeah. This guy is putting together the whole package in ways that we've seen like Kanye do and Puff do and Jay. And it wouldn't surprise me if, 5-10 years down the line, this guy is one of those guys who's on that Forbes billionaire list. I think he could be one of the wealthiest. And so I think what Benny is saying is, listen, he's shown me an entrepreneurship grind, and I understand that. And now it's on me to apply it.
Yeah, I think that's really, really good point. And also just shout out to Westside Gunn. I mean, we talk a lot about Biggie and Heavy D, or Craig Mack, like artists that defied the sex symbol. Griselda has defied the ageism in hip hop. I mean, and there's other examples right now, many names that you and I have both mentioned during this episode, but Griselda came in and has caught all of this buzz, not as 20-year-olds or 17-year-olds, but as guys in their 30s. And I love that. I mean, that really changes the goalposts for what is possible in hip hop.
Yeah, that was the headline in our Benny interview. I think Benny was 34 when he really started to take off with rap after he came home, and he talked about rap being a grown man's game. It's perceived as a kid's game, but it's actually a grown man's game. And he elaborated on that in a really dope way. So again, check that out.
Absolutely. And the next joint up is Billy Joe. As we talk about production, to me, this is just me speaking, second best beat on the album after Johnny P's Cadillac, another Alchemist joint. I love on this record that, Benny makes the connection that there are killers that, get immunity. He references Sammy the Bull Gravano, but also talks about, folks that are hustling for whatever reasons they are, that are given the type of sentences that murderers may deserve. Just an interesting dichotomy. And again, it speaks to the kind of the growth that you're getting. Benny's always been smart, but to make that point right now is kind of a nudge again to get out the game, like really look at the consequences of this stuff. And yeah, the system's effed up. And yeah, institutionally racist classes go on, but take this nudge. Don't be doing this stuff forever. I think it's a great record.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that stood out to me was, again, his kind of self-awareness. So he says, I wasn't really good at it, so selling poison suited me. He understands that what he's doing is really poisoning the people. He gets that. But he did what he did to, get what he needed to do. But he also talks about that. There's a lot of braggadocious lyricism on this album about him being a GOAT and stuff like that. But in this one, he says one classic from great. So he acknowledges that he might not have a classic album yet. And that's one of the things that's standing in the way of him being called one of the GOATs or one of the greats. So I think that's pretty dope.
Yeah, I mean, I like that. I mean, Benny's clearly, kind of reacted to a Grammy snub that you and I both described, at the end of going into this next award season as it pertains to burden of proof. But he's also saying like, yeah, I mean, I should be up there for an award, but classic. And I love that. And hip hop heads should love that too, because I think we can all agree that C word is thrown around way too much. And, we should hold those things sacred. And I love that Benny's clearly motivated to give you that kind of joint.
Yeah. So Guerrero, you want to take that one?
Sure, man. It's the Westside Gunn feature, which we knew we were going to get. It's a Derringer and Beat Butcha production. I think this is another exceptional beat. And, we talked about the sequencing in this album, starting with the only pre-album single you get, super high profile. One thing I'll say about TT4, it doesn't lose steam as it winds out. And while these songs might not have the grabby feature, I think Westside Gunn and Benny's always going to get attention, even though they've got so many songs. It's a really cool joint. In there, Benny compares himself to Harry O, which was one of the, financiers of Death Row Records. Interesting, just kind of footnote. And Westside Gunn is so prolific. I mean, he has dominated since Supreme Clientele up until the end of 2021, just putting out a number of projects, multiple series, really making his presence felt to usher in some new guys, as well as be, a real anchor for Conway and Benny. This is the first time I can remember in 3 or 4 years that, like, I haven't heard West in a while. Like, I missed him. So the fact that he jumped on this record, he really makes you kind of whets the appetite to hear this collaboration.
Yeah, so Harry O is Michael Harry O Harris, I believe, and who's also in prison right now.
No, not to correct you. Trump pardoned him.
Oh,
so he's
word.
out.
He's Harry O is out.
Last, yeah,
oh, wow.
And it's a fun fact, and I'm glad, this is obviously a very live conversation. Harry O has given his utmost blessing to Snoop Dogg's ownership of Death Row. And even in the Dog Pound video, where, quick aside, Dog Pound back on Death Row, making a sequel to Dog Food 2. Read the whole story on AFH. Daz and Corrupt make it a point as they shout out Dre, shout out Suge Knight, they shout out Harry O. So for a guy whose money may have seemed misspent for 30 years, he's seeing some recognition for his investment.
That's dope. I didn't know he was out. He was one of the initial investors in Death Row, and actually had filed a lawsuit because he wasn't being paid what he thought he was. His wife, Lydia Harris, was very involved in Death Row as well. Snoop shouted him out on his song with Nate Dogg that we have on our AFH playlist right now. So very, very instrumental to Death Row. And so, this is, again, Benny signaling in a real subtle way that he's really trying to do that. He's had the same path as Harry O. He didn't have to spend as much time as he did, but he's looking to build his empire in the same way and have that much impact on the culture, which I think is dope. So next is Bust a Brick Nick. You had something else?
No, I love the title too. Anybody I know named Nick, you got a new nickname.
Bust a Brick. Another Alchemist production. This might be my favorite song on the album. I think the beat is just absolutely incredible, and Benny is just like spitting that real ish. He talks about, and this is something that this is the only, to my recollection, the only reference to what he went through recently. Benny was shot in Houston, and within the last 6 months or so. And he said he was in a wheelchair. It was hard for him to smile on his 36th birthday. And so, this guy was actually like endangered, and injured enough to be in a wheelchair. And so just one line, and that's what I'm talking about in terms of how he's not like pouring his heart out like over the course of the entire song, but you get this sprinkled in things that are really, really significant. And then he also talks about the fact that, people are now saying that because he's doing bigger songs with bigger acts. He had a song on Burden of Proof with Lil Wayne and Big Sean, and he's got a song with Drake in the Tuck, and he's done J. Cole on this album. So he says doing songs with bigger acts, and they tell me that that's going industry. He's like, we talked about this before. He's actually not compromised his sound or his identity in any way. Everything he does is true to who he is as an artist. So it's kind of preposterous, and also is very limiting. Now, why can an artist not grow and get commercial appeal and still be who they are? It's one of my pet peeves with Kendrick. We have a lot of people who loved Kendrick back when we started first supporting him, but now hate Kendrick and see him as a sellout, when Kendrick's artistry has never, ever wavered. His lyricism has never changed. I think Benny will always be the same way too.
Yeah, you said it. And the closer on the album is Mr. Chow Hall, which I'm going to speculate on this title. I think it's a word jam. I think, dining at Mr. Chow's and Chow Hall being like, mess hall, like probably where you might eat in prison. I think it's a flip. And not to correct you, but he does reference the Houston shooting in this song too, where he says in lyrics that, he was asked, brought into the precinct to point out, who may have done it, and he refused. And, everyone might have different opinions on that. But as somebody who spent his 36th birthday in a wheelchair, I think it's really interesting that Benny stayed true to the brand that he represents. And again, it's just one of those places that, you know, he's keeping the G code, even though a lot of this album is about, okay, like if you're out in these streets, move forth, like do something else. But it's also like, don't, you know, like the commandment, you know, you gotta stand on what you stand for something or fall for everything. And I like that. And he also, you know, in this song talks about, you know, bringing somebody into the game and making in a week what they make in a year. And I kind of racked my brain to think if that was, you know, a direct shot. I don't think that TT4 is about disses. It doesn't seem like it's that kind of energy. I think it's just, again, you know, Benny just kind of taking a victory lap for where he's at now and pushing upward. Was there anything about that joint, which is produced by Alchemist, that, you know, sticks with you?
No, I think you hit it, man. I think you hit all the points that I would cover. I think it was a cool way to close. I still think that if you had followed it up with Johnny P's Caddy, it would have been, you know, kind of the ultimate coda. Maybe like Kendrick's Compton with Dre, you know, for Good Kid, Mad City. I think, but with the energy taken down a little bit. Just a side note too, by the way, did you realize that Cartoons and Cereal was supposed to be the ending to Good Kid, Mad City?
I had read that long after the fact. I had heard that somewhere, and I think that's one of Kendrick's best songs. I'm a huge Gunplay fan, especially in that era.
I was told that by someone very, very close to Kendrick, you know, who would absolutely know. And it's interesting. It's almost like how Hollywood sometimes makes you do a Hollywood ending that's like happy and everything. Because if you put Cartoons and Cereal, which is dark and fatalistic, at the end, it completely changes the trajectory of Good Mad City. And so,
drops you off. Yeah.
Instead of being like a victory lap and like, you know, coronation of King Kendrick, it's like, yo, this is where my destiny is. And it's like, it's almost like, damn, playing it forward and backwards, right? So Kendrick has played with that theme for a while now.
I like it. The reason why, you know, Johnny P's Cadillac, Cole has the final say. And in this album, we both can agree it has to end with Benny's voice, right?
That's true. But, you know, that could be fixed with an outro. But yeah, I get it.
Extra verse, yeah. But I feel you. I mean, overall, I mean, just any takeaways from TT4? You started the podcast. I mean, it's been the most anticipated album for you in some time. Just reflections.
Yeah, so it's the kind of album I want to take in for a while because I had certain expectations that were created by Johnny P's Caddy, and I want to listen to the body of work for what it is. I think it is a fantastic body of work. I don't think Benny has missed since Tana Talk 3, you know, and that is what, 7, 8 projects, something like that.
Yeah,
he's on a tear unlike any MC we've seen in a long time. You and I have both said on a number of occasions he's probably the hottest MC of the last 2 years, and I don't think this does anything to slow that down. So I enjoy it, man. I think it's great. There's like 3 or 4 apps to the playlist, which is always my ultimate thumbs up. How about you?
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. We had that conversation about the last 2 years 1 month ago. I was living on a mountain in California. Life was quite different. And I stood by that then. I stand by that now. I think Benny's been the best MC of the last 3 years. I don't know, and you didn't ask, but I don't know that I'm ready to say that this is Benny's best album. I think he's put out a tremendous body of work. Here's what I decided after close to 10 listens. I prefer the TT series, having only heard, you know, 2 of the albums really well and one, you know, streaming it a couple times. I prefer that to the Plugs I Talk, but that is no knock whatsoever on Plugs. I think that's been an amazing series, but this is the brand that I like most with Benny.
Plugs I Met. Interesting. So we're on opposite sides of the coins, which does not surprise me. The Plugs I Met for me is my preferred series. Plugs I Met, the first one, might be my favorite Benny project ever. I think it's just absolutely incredible. 18 Wheeler may have been one of my songs of the year that year. I think he had a joint with Royce on that. Like he just that album and the 5 to 50.
Yeah, the Royce joint I think was on TT3.
Okay. The 5 to 50 was the last song.
That's
Or that
unplugged.
song that
That's
song was incredible. And then Plugs Unmet too. I really liked too last year with Harry Fraud. I thought that was incredible as well. So I think of the series, I prefer the Plugs Unmet. But again, the fact that we disagree just speaks to how great Benny has been.
yeah, and how much of a nonconformist you are. No, I'm just kidding. So
All right.
this
So best
oh, go
album
ahead.
of 2022 so far?
It's definitely in that conversation. I think the year has been off to an interesting start. There's a lot of albums that I keep coming
Wait, and
back.
is this rap music or any genre?
I like the Weeknd joint a lot. I know that a lot of people seem like they chase them away. For me, I would say that my best music this year has been hip hop. The two albums that I'm really kind of hanging with right now are this and Earth Gang. You know, but I'm not ready to make proclamations quite yet. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, Earth Gang is absolutely amazing. Ghetto Gods, love that album. I've listened to it quite a few times now. Um, I think my favorite album of the year so far is Black Radio 3 by Robert Glasper.
Oh wow.
That is
Okay.
an incredible album. It's got Posthumous on it. I think Common, Killer
Killer
Mike, Big Crit, D Smoke. It's a really, really, really dope album. I wouldn't say it's necessarily hip hop, but it's got a lot of hip hop influence to it. So yeah, but this is a great album. We're going to talk about a couple more real quick too. So next up, we did an entire podcast last week devoted to Slaughterhouse and the drama that has brought down the house over the last several weeks or so. And in fact, it's been several years in the making. We've just now gotten a glimpse into what's been happening inside the Slaughterhouse over the last like 5-6 years or so. But we encourage you to go back to listen to that on the backstory. It's the last podcast we did. But Joell Ortiz and King Crooked, one half of Slaughterhouse, have released a project called The Rise and Fall of Slaughterhouse. Now, they had released 2 singles prior to this. One was Vacancy, and the other one was, do you remember?
Yeah, it was called Backstage.
Yeah, Backstage. And, it led to some reactions from Royce 5'9" and Joe Budden. Initially on social media, they just posted some of their thoughts, but then they had an IG Live where they spoke for an hour. And after that, Joell joined them for another half an hour, and it became incredibly heated. And they aired out a lot of their business publicly. We break that all down. But, 6 days later, they released their album and, listen to the whole thing. So what are your top level thoughts on the album?
I think it offers closure to Slaughterhouse stands. And for anyone curious, I think that the music quality is strong. I mean, Joell and Crooked, are top tier MCs, no question. Yeah, I was curious to listen. It's a different kind of listen. Like you're looking for, it's almost like a news story in verse. Like you're trying, and maybe that's me working in the media and knowing a lot of these guys. Like I'm looking for what I didn't know, what I didn't get in the headlines. But I thought it plays really well. There's a couple of songs on there that I do believe, of recent years are some of the best just standalone songs, certainly from Crooked, who hasn't put out a formal album, but up there with some of Joell's best work too. That's me though. What about you?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting album because I believe that, especially based on what we have seen and the incredible timeline you put together and the conversation that happened last week, I believe that each one of them, Joell and Crook, believes everything they say on this to be true. Joe and Royce had accused them of purposefully lying about some things. I don't believe that to be the case based on the lyrics and what that conversation had. I think that they are speaking from their perspective and everything they say they believe is true. And I think it is in part kind of like a airing out session of everything that's gone on in a way that's cathartic for them. I think it's in part you know, a victory lap and celebrating the things that Slaughterhouse accomplished. It's not all bad. You know, they're really, talking about how good Slaughterhouse was and what they did and what they meant to the culture. I think it's ultimately, though, about sadness, about a dream unfulfilled, and what they could have been had they been able to align and come together from a business standpoint to get what they needed to get done. And part of that relates to Glass House, the album that is supposedly on the shelf. And they detail that on a song called F Glass House. They talk about, actually, it's another song. Let's see. It's called, there's another song where they talk about all the producers that were on Glass House
towards the end of the album.
Yeah. And it's really, really interesting. They had Just Blaze, they had Cardiac, they had Ill Minds, and a couple of others, but like they go into it. So it's really tangible.
Justice League, I think. Yeah.
Justice League, yeah. There's another song where it's called Floodwaters, where Crooked likens this album to Marvin Gaye's Here, My Dear. And for those who don't know, Marvin Gaye had a really bitter divorce, I think from his, I can't remember which wife it was, but
Anna Gordy, I think.
Yeah, right, Anna Gordy. And as part of the settlement, he had to record an album and give give the album and proceeds to her. So I think she owned it too. And so he recorded this album called Here, My Dear, where he basically just ran down all his complaints about the marriage and divorce and stuff like that. Just publicly, like, put it out. And at the time, it was super controversial, but now I think it's one of the more acclaimed and appreciated albums of his because it was so raw. And maybe that's going to be the case for this too. But yeah, man, I think that ultimately, and I also think that it's hopeful. Like, there are times where they talk about where, maybe, this will spark them and get them to like actually, come back together. But there's also declarations of them being dead. It's all over the place emotionally, but I also think it's realistic to how a person would feel in this kind of situation.
I agree. I had 3 takeaways from the album. I mean, the first single, as you mentioned, was Vacancy, and we covered that on our site. But one of the things that I don't think you and I realized at the time when we first heard it is it's making an appeal. There's a lyric, I believe it's Crook that says it, where he says, hope the other half will listen, put the business in back and get back to business. And I'm very curious because that song came out a week before the Instagram Live of, Royce and Joe and Joell talking on video, and then Crook in the chat, and then he moved his joint to Clubhouse. But I'm curious, we're living in a time where albums are living, breathing things. I mean, we see that with Kanye since Pablo, like, I'm going to make adjustments even after it's out. And I'm really curious if that single, as we talk about first singles, if Royce and Joe would have said like, yo, okay, I hear this. All right, let's do it. I'll sign the paperwork, or maybe we don't want to release it over here. We'll release it over here. I'm really curious if this album would have never come out. And that's one of the questions, I'm sure Crook or Joell will get, or maybe not. Maybe we'll ask them. But, I'd love to know if they were prepared to hold this back if they saw the outcome that they wanted. And during that IG Live, and we spent a whole podcast talking about it this month, the most cringe thing for me, just as a grown-ass man, was watching Joe, who, over the years I've been a fan of musically, I've been a fan of personally, but telling Joell that he wasn't good. I hate when I watch grown people tell one another, because I took that to mean financially. And oddly enough, the second full song on the album is called Ain't Nobody Mad. And I really like that, Joell gets the opportunity to say, hey, I own real estate, I own restaurants, like, I'm good. Because to me, in a lot of ways, Joell Ortiz is the MC Ren of this group. And if you listen to NWA's second album, Cube had left, Ren carries the group lyrically. And, Joe and Royce and Crooked are big personalities. Every one of them uses social media. to their advantage. Joell, he said it last week, he's not the social media guy. So I like the fact that he used this album to get the last word. And it's not about money, but if somebody else with a platform is going to tell you what you are, you should at least have the opportunity to correct them. And I thought that was really cool. And then the third point is, Joell made a great album with Apollo Brown with Mona Lisa, but I would say both of these MCs at times haven't had my favorite production, especially Crook. Crooked I, I rooted for him so hard when he was the flagship artist of Death Row, but Death Row is about production. And if you don't have Dre and you don't have Daz and you don't have Quick, what do you have? And I've never heard Crooked I over the type of production on an album length that I've wanted him to. Some of the production on the Rise and Fall of Slaughterhouse is really, really good. You brought up the joint Smoke, which, incredible, produced by DJ Silk. And while that's not a household name, that's one of the guys that's on Dre's team, which I thought was really interesting. He produced a joint on Compton. He produced What You Gonna Do for J.O. Felony and Method Man back in the day with DMX. Incredible song. Shout out to Joell and Crook because they really went and made this musical. And there's so many times where we care what people have to say to each other. I said it in the last episode, Kanye and Jay speaking on the fall of Rockefeller on Diamonds Are Forever. I'm tuned in, I wanna know. And for anybody that held Slaughterhouse on the highest level, this project has to be rewarding that way.
Yeah, man, in terms of Smoke, I personally believe that if Crooked is on the right beat, there is nobody that can see him. That dude is one of the best rappers in the game. He is so lyrical and his flow is so impeccable. You heard that on Paige Kennedy's remake of the grand finale where Crook just like went berserk for 2 straight minutes. And he absolutely destroys that beat. Like literally he had me on my Ric Flair, like, woo! I was just like going crazy, man. And I agree with you on just generally the beats are good on this, and there's some that are fantastic. I will say this, just to close, that there is nothing that I heard on this that was in contradiction to anything that we said last week in terms of like laying out where their differences were. Most of them stem around business. A lot of it tied to being signed to Shady Records. One of the interesting things is that there's a bit more detail about the deal that Crook and Joell had on the table for Royce and Joe that apparently they believe that they've turned down, although Royce and Joe deny that. But supposedly it was a 7-figure deal. So it was at least $1 million, divided by 4. Who knows if that's meaningful to all of them, but it's not insignificant, So I think that as we concluded last week, I don't think this is the final chapter of Slaughterhouse. I think it is a to be continued. I do think that this will make it a bit more difficult for them to come together as a foursome. And Royce said that in the IG Live last week too. But I think that all the stuff we laid down in our timeline, all the stuff that they discussed in that IG comes out in this album. We hear bits and pieces of it sprinkled out throughout the entire album. And it's from their perspective. And they've stayed true to this. And I can see a place where both sides can be true.
I'll be curious to see this album's playability, 3 years, 5 years from now. I'm not saying that as a leading point. I'm just curious what Slaughterhouse superfans think. I think it's interesting that we go from talking about TT4 to Slaughterhouse. Royce made the point years ago. He actually called in, or Joe called him on the podcast. There's a story on AFH of Joe and Royce wishing that Griselda doesn't make the mistakes that Slaughterhouse did. And when you talk about the way that Benny and Conway are handling the competition, I mean, competition isn't at the crux of Slaughterhouse's falling out. I think just differing passions and solo interests are. But, the two guys that, seem like they are meat and potatoes rap, Joell and Crook, is really cool to see. And like you said, I hope this isn't the last thing. But there's one other album that dropped.
One other thing. So competition might not be part of it, but I definitely believe that career choice is part of it, or communication choice, to be more specific. And there's a song on here, and I can't remember which one it is, but where it's on Coastin, where Crooked talks about having Royce's back in the Lupe situation, and this is also the one where he mentions the 7-figure deal. I think the fact that Joe became a podcaster, an on-air host, is a real point of contention for a lot of people. It caused problems with Royce and M. It's caused problems with Joell because he didn't feel like he's being supported. It's caused problems with Crook. Like, I think that's a really big one. And there's also one where someone talks about social media too, which, I think relates in part to Royce as well. So given the social media part, you and I talked last week about whether or not we thought this was real. And I think we both concluded that it was real, but that this IG live they had last week also might still be something that was done intentionally to support them. Looking at it now, I'm wondering, do you think that it helped or hurt? Because on some ways I can see it as being a spoiler, because everything they discussed in the IG live ultimately came out on the album. Yeah. And it's like, now it's like okay, we already know that type thing. But what do you think?
Yeah, but I also think this is super niche. I think this is for a very specific set of hardcore fans. But I agree, for you and me that know these guys, are fans of the group, but neither one of us have Slaughterhouse tattoos. Yeah, I mean, that let a lot of the cat out of the bag. I think that's a really good point. The other curious thing, just as an outro on this album, they included Still in My Feelings, which is a joint that was on Joell's album last year. We talked to Joell about Autograph, and it's very interesting. I mean, there have been times where, in hip hop, I think of Money Ain't a Thing, the Jermaine Dupri and Jay-Z record appeared on Volume 2. It appears on JD's album. There's places where you see that. I'm really interested to know why that song from 2021 reappears here, but conversation for another day, I guess.
Yeah.
But I started, and I really want to kind of turn it to you, because there's an album that you've texted me twice, maybe 3 times about this year, and it's not one of the traditional talking points of this weekend, and you're really excited about it. Talk to me about Fly Anakin.
Yeah, Fly Anakin has a song, an album called Frank, and I've known of Fly Anakin for some time, but I will say that he really stuck out to me for the first time on the latest Evidence album. There's a song on Evidence's album, and I thought Fly Anakin just killed it, and maybe it's the beat or whatever it is, but his style, and I think he's another disciple of Rock Marcy, to your point earlier. His style is so, and his voice is so unique. But his album, Frank, I've been living with for now like 6 weeks or so. And for me, it's my album of the year so far in 2022. I think it is incredibly soulful. I think that his flow is impeccable. I think the stuff that he's talking about is incredible. I really think that people who are followers of AFH will dig this album. I put 3 or so, maybe 4 songs on the playlist. I could literally put 6 or 7. To me, it's an album. It's a rare album where I can listen to it front to back and literally not have any impulse to skip a single song. That's super rare in this day and age. And it's I think a 15 song album, something like that. It's let's see, it's even long, 17 songs. It's a 17 song album, but it's just absolutely incredible. And I think he's obviously been grinding. There's no one who releases an album, especially of this quality, who does it like just off the rip. He's been grinding. But for me, it was surprising and like how quick and how high the quality was. And I just think he's dope. Very passionate about this one.
Yeah, I mean, Ev, and we had a great conversation with Ev last year. Ev is one of those people that I trust. When he shouts out an artist on the rise or that you should know, it sticks to me differently than the usual. And again, sort of like Benny, AFH had supported Fly Anakin either 2018 or 2019. Shout out to Jordan Commandaire. We had a Michael Millions and Fly Anakin joint, on our site that we supported. And I love what's happening in Richmond, Virginia right now. Even Nicholas F. who a lot of people just thought was like, oh, one of those guys that Drake worked with. They're getting their moment. And Fly Anakin's that. And this album's on Lex Records, which is a label that worked with Doom and Bad Bad Not Good. And, you know, is a trusted source of great, you know, hip hop, Prince Poetry, other people. So I'm going to sit with that one because I played it, but I want to hear it the way that you're hearing it. And shout out, I mean, the production on it's nuts. Madlib worked on it, excuse me, and a host of other people. So I'm glad to hear you give that some shine.
Yeah, production's incredible, man. Super soulful. Definitely take a listen to that one in the headphones, on the car. But this whole vibe, man, his image is great. His fashion. I just think it's an amazing, amazing project.
I love watching veterans and Fly Anakin fits that push through. I mean, last year, you know, one of our albums of the year, Alchemist and Armand Hammer, you know, with their Haram album, and, you know, shout out to Billy Woods and the whole Backwoods movement. Like, these are guys that have been doing it. And to watch hip hop veterans get their moment and do something with it, there's a hope story to that. I think that's one of the reasons why this culture exists, is we always believe that it's possible. So, hey man, 3 great albums on one Friday. That was worthy of a happy hour. You know?
Word, for sure, man. Yeah.
So
cheer.
what's your song of the week, man?
You know what? I'm gonna go with Underdog Theme from Fly Anakin. That is my joint. That's been a regular heavy rotation for me. How about you?
I'm gonna go with a joint that's on the playlist. We didn't talk about it today, but Brother Ali, you know, I've been a fan of Ali for almost 20 years. You know, Rites of Passage, Shadows on the Sun era. And Ali, I didn't realize, I mean, Ali is no longer working with Rhymesayers, or, you know, sort of like maybe what Benny's done with Black Soprano Family, like he stepped adjacent. But there's a song, I texted it to you recently, you added it to the playlist. It's called Going Through It. And oddly enough, it's produced by Ant of Atmosphere, one of the founders of Rhymesayers. And there's 3 stories in the record. It's a storytelling joint. It's about people going through it in these days and times, and they're all true. Ali has his own podcast. I've been tuning into it. But that song, I love the beat. I love Ali's frame of mind. I just keep coming back to it, and it kind of speaks a little bit to the week that I had.
Word. I hear you. That's dope, man. Well, here's to a great end to the week, and here's the better weeks to come.
And cheers. Salute until we do it again.
All right, man. Peace.